Welcome to virtual Sunday worship at First Parish in Framingham. I am the Reverend Aaron Stockwell, and it is my honor to serve as your senior minister. First Parish in Framingham is a welcoming congregation. This means that we celebrate and welcome people of all sexual orientations, races, ages, gender identities, abilities, or beliefs. Whoever you are, wherever you are on life's journey, you, dear one, are welcome here. Unitarian Universalism is a faith of covenant and not creed. Honoring the value of spiritual freedom and diversity, we have no set doctrine or statement of doctrine, but we gather as a covenanted community to search for truth and how it applies to ethical living. Since 1701, people have gathered as this community, seeking peace and seeking meaning. Those people are somewhat like you. You belong here, maybe only for the next hour, but we hope for longer. You belong here, and we are happy to have you with us. Our virtual coffee hour will happen as soon as our service concludes. There will be information on how to join on the final screen. Our opening words are from the Reverend Linda Hart, who writes this: "In the dark of the night, around fires and candlelight, those of ancient days gone by would pause to remember. They would remember the names of those now dead. They would remember the beloved of their lives. As with them, this morning we gather too to remember. We celebrate all souls today, those who have lived and died, the beloved of our lives, the unnamed who came before us. As their lives were lit by that of the holy, by that of the divine that burns within all of us, we kindle the chalice in celebration." The flaming chalice is the symbol of our faith tradition. It represents a flame of wisdom and of hope. As the children of our congregation light the chalice, and as I light the chalice in our sanctuary, may we each kindle our own separate flames. You are invited to type into the chat box, if you're watching this live, "The chalice is lit in our home."
words of affirmation. Love is the doctrine of this church.
The quest of truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve all life with compassion, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. This is our great covenant, one with another and with our God.
Numbers can be really easy, but they can also be really hard to understand, especially the bigger they get. So today we're going to play with a little bit of a sense of scale, just to see how numbers can grow into really, really big numbers that feel like, okay, what's a million? It's only 1 million. But we're going to get to see just how many 100,000 would look like. So I want you to imagine that this dot right here in the center of my page, imagine that's a person. Now, as we know, we're all connected, right? So this one person has a wonderful life where they're connected to perhaps a mother, maybe a best friend, maybe they have a favorite teacher that they worked with in their lifetime, or perhaps they had a child, maybe even a neighbor. This one person of ours here may have had a boss. Maybe they had a series of students that they worked with. It's clear to see how quickly this one person's life can impact so very many people around them, a whole network of people that love and care for this one little dot. Imagine then what it would look like to have 10 of these people. Here we have 10. Maybe they knew each other, maybe they never did, but their lives reach out and touch hundreds, if not thousands, of others. I couldn't possibly draw all the arrows here of all the people that these 10 people connected to. If I add these 10 and make that 100, that's 10 of my 10s. Now we're getting to a whole lot of dots on this page. It's starting to get a little dizzy, isn't it? 100 people here on this sheet. 100 people. That's probably less than go to your school, but it's still a lot of people. If I add 10 of these, then I'm going to find myself with 1,000 people. Look at all of these dots. Each one of them a life. Each one of them working, playing, growing, learning, making mistakes, living. If I took 100 of these, all of these little dots, and I tried to put them all onto one page, I can't do it. Just not enough room for all those dots. They're all there, but they start to blend together and it's really hard to see. But that would be 10,000 dots. That's a lot of dots. Each of those a life. Each of those somebody maybe that you have loved. So in order to make this a little bit easier, we're going to need a whole lot more space. So as we lay out all of these sheets of paper, we get to 100,000 lives. 100,000 lives, each connected to hundreds of thousands of other lives. The loss of any one of these dots, any one of these lives is a tragedy. It's sad, isn't it, to think that maybe one of these lives didn't make it all the way to the end of where they wanted to go, of what they wanted to do. So as we look at these 100,000 lives, and we think about COVID-19 and how many lives it has taken. In the United States alone, 222,000 people are no longer with us because of COVID-19. That means what you see here all laid out times 2 and a little bit more. We'd probably fill the whole aisle of the church. And as we think about how many have died in the world, well, we've reached 1 million. That means I'd have to lay out everything you see here 1,000 more times. Our church doesn't have enough floor space for us to lay it all out in. Each of those lives connected to thousands of others who loved, who experienced joy and sorrow, and who are today mourning the loss of their one tiny little dot.
To this tapestry of a community, we each bring our joys and our sorrows, our milestones, happy and sad occasions. We know that joy shared is joy expanded, and sorrow shared can feel as though someone is lifting a burden. There will be prompts on the screen that will give better order to our sharing. Do remember this, friends. In this virtual space, privacy cannot be guaranteed. So do feel free to get in touch with me if there is something a little too tender to share that you wish to let me and others know about.
Comfort me, comfort me, comfort me, oh my soul. Comfort me, comfort me, comfort me, oh my soul. Sing with me, sing with me, sing with me, oh my soul. Sing with me, sing with me, sing with me, oh my soul. Speak with me, speak with me, speak with me, oh my soul. Speak with me, speak with me, speak with me, oh my soul. Stay with me, stay with me, stay with me, oh my soul. Stay with me, stay with me, stay with me, oh my soul. Dance with me, dance with me, dance with me, oh my soul. Dance with me, dance with me, dance with me, oh my soul. Pray with me, with me, oh my soul. Pray with me, pray with me, pray with me, oh my soul. Comfort me, comfort me, comfort me, oh my soul. Comfort me, comfort me, comfort me, oh my soul.
We come now to the time in our service that we set aside for pondering our deepest longings and the stirrings of our own heart. So I invite you to find your breath. Let it be a comfortable breath. A comfortable breath in and a comfortable breath out. O breath of our ancestors, we are their deepest longings. We are the summation of their failures and their successes. We give thanks for their legacies, and we give thanks that we are allowed to dream even larger dreams than they dreamed. We give thanks for all that we have. May we be emboldened to bring love into this world. May we give strength to those who are healing, to those who are lonely. Let us be strengthened as we bring peace to the war-torn parts of our world. And let us extend compassion to ourselves when we are a little bit too human. May these hopes and our ancestors' dreams guide us in the coming week. Thank you to so many of you who shared the names of your beloved dead over this last week with me. If I happen to mispronounce their name, I am sorry, and I take comfort in the fact that there are those present with us today who knew how to pronounce their names. And if I misplaced their name or their photograph, please feel free to type into the chat box those names. It's found to the right of this screen. And also feel free to type into the chat box the names of other beloved dead that you wish to remember now. As I speak their names, we remember their lives. May we remember their faces, and may their legacy and their life be a blessing to us all. After we finish naming those names, we will say together, in a way, the litany that is 720 in our gray hymnal by Roland Gettelson, We Remember Them. Thank you to those of you who participated in making this sound collage possible. Gerard Lamontagne, Faye Leonard, Marie Migner, Jacob Handelman, John Edward Rastall III, Charles Carrion, Ruth Carrion, Glenn Washburn, Forrest Washburn, Francis Didymy, Frank Vosnick, Joe DeComo, Kay DeComo, Lily, Pat DeComo, Rose O'Neill, Reagan Russell, Carol Bouchard, John O'Ree Butler, Grace Reed, Brian Schifrin, Joseph Mendelson, Carol Elizabeth Rader, Reverend Holly Hollerith, Joanne Ickler, Richard and Ella Dymock, William and Gladys de Bordeaux, Richard and Virginia de Bordeaux, Dick Ortmeyer, Sidney Tony Greeley, David LeBlanc, Phil Park, Barbara Ackerley, Glenn Ackley, Dodie Marble, Betsy and John Banjack, Lorna Merson, Toby Krell, Steve Schoonmaker, Jennifer Durant, Franklin Porter, Mary Porter, Andy Porter, Rose Altieri, Al Altieri, Laura Bement Stone, Henry Bowditch Stone, Rogers Washburn Cabot, Barbara Helen Steele, John Mylott, Larry Foley, Phyllis Siebolt, Marjorie Yount, Georgette Canino, Frank Canino, Tony Hunter, Jean Parsons, Billy DeComo, Rita Carriero, April Lettany Smith, Frederick Kimball Lettany, Irene Yuckins, Sam Bikos and Melanie Damianos, Al and Liz Damianos, Jean and Brian Homoki, Mary McCarty, Marjorie Carberry, Sashi, Mary Verdi, Dorothy Howard, Dr. Donald W. Morrison, Greg Stoddard, Jessica Alm, the Lawton and Johnson family's beloved, Anita Marie Orlando, Frank Paul Orlando, Mark Thompson, Bev Pooley, Dwight Morrow Scandrett, Julia Lothrop Scandrett, Charles Chick Dabrush, Warren and Doris Bolton, David, Carol, and Nancy, Bob and Janet Claflin, Anne Marie Fendel, James and Mary Mello, Margaret Devine Mello, Marilyn Devine, Karen Ahern, Mary Iodice, Charles Curry, Charlotte and Irving Nelson, Donald Kaufman, Monrad and Roselle Hofferning, Elodie and Gordon Ross, Wally and Sandy Arvidson, Elmer and Thelma Richmond, Jim Ellis, Megan Scott, Mara Scott, James M. Scott, Winifred Adamson, Robert Adamson, Beryl Cobb, Melvin Cobb, Mary Norwood, Alice Mullins, Russell Grieve, Gustav and Catherine Warner, Janet Warner, Alta Pence Clark, Edwin L. Clark, Jim McGrath, Bill Conroy, Thomas and Alice McGrath, Clint McDuff, Corinne McDuff, Janet McDuff Whitehouse, Polly McDuff, Nancy, Isabel, Myrtle, Jean Stockwell, Bryce Stockwell, James Morey, Eleanor, Linda, Carol and Robert Egerton, William Egerton, Dwight Egerton, Mike Caruso, Sharon Hollis, William Lawrence, Ronald DeLynn Johnson, Donna Linderman, Sue Cooter, Erica Zeisman. Now please type into the chat box the names of your beloveds who have died. May their memory be a blessing to us all.
In the rising of the sun
and in its going down,
we remember them.
in the blowing of the wind,
and in the chill of winter,
We remember them.
in the opening of buds,
and in the rebirth of spring,
We remember them.
in the blueness of the sky,
and in the warmth of summer,
We remember them.
in the rustling of leaves,
and in the beauty of autumn,
We remember them.
in the beginning of the year,
and when it ends.
We remember them.
when we are weary and in need of strength,
We remember them.
when we are lost and sick at heart,
We remember them.
When we have joys we yearn to share,
We remember them.
So long as we live, they too shall live, for they are now a part of us.
We remember them.
And before we take an offering to support the work of our congregation in these walls and beyond them, I do have an update from the Pies on the Common Committee. As of a few minutes before noon on October 23rd, the new total is $10,308.71. Thanks again to the Pies on the Common Committee for making this unusual year of Pies on the Common a success. Though we are not passing these plates around, it is still important to remember that the ongoing work of this congregation in these walls and beyond them depends on your generosity. Michael A. Schuler, the Minister Emeritus at the First Unitarian Society of Madison, Wisconsin, writes these words: "If you are proud of this church, become its advocate. If you are concerned for its future, share its message. If its values resonate deep within you, give it a measure of your devotion. This church cannot survive without your faith, your confidence, and your enthusiasm. Its destiny, the larger hope, rests in your hands." Somebody once described grief like this. Imagine you have a box, and in that box, on the side of it, on the inside, is a button. This is the button that makes you feel pain or sorrow or sadness or anger. When you lose someone in your life, a big ball is placed in your box. And that ball moves around. Because it is so big at the moment, it always presses that pain button, even if the box is slightly jostled. Now, as time goes on, the ball of grief gets smaller. But then, when you least expect it, the ball of grief presses that pain button. Sure, over the years it goes away. Or it doesn't go away. It just gets smaller. And that's if you've lost someone to death. You have one spherical ball of grief. You fill that box up with many other balls of grief over your life. The sizes shift and change and get smaller. What I think is true about mourning one person is that we remember the way they lived and loved. We celebrate their life and we mourn their death. What I think is true about mourning the dead of a pandemic is that we cannot mourn their individual lives, for no one knew each one of them. We instead feel anger. Not necessarily anger at the individual dying, which we might feel with the death of a loved one. We instead rage at the system, at the government failings that meant that they died. It is challenging because the rage is directed at many people, which is why perhaps there have been no moments for us to collectively grieve yet. In the aftermath of the 9/11, the September 11th attacks, it seemed as though we could focus on a common enemy. When it is a pandemic, we find different directions for our rage. With a moment of collective grief, much like our nation faces today with some 220,000 people who have died because of the coronavirus, I wonder if we have a sense of collective grief and what that sense of national trauma might feel like. I think it's like that box of our lives, but the ball of grief isn't perfectly spherical. So its movements are unpredictable as it jostles around the box. There are also more buttons inside our boxes. Buttons that activate feelings that we don't know and didn't know were connected to grief, but they are. Now, Benji Hart, in his essay, "Feeling is Not Weakness," challenges us about grief and what our society teaches us about grief. He says, we understand and have been even taught that we cannot allow ourselves to feel the constant rage and pain we deserve to feel. We're told it's unsustainable, and much of our community's conventional wisdom tells us it is not effective. As a queer Black man, Benji Hart is writing about violence done to Black bodies and queer bodies, and the grief that comes from those losses. He goes on to explain and explore why we must feel grief. Pretending I am not sad, he writes, hiding my pain will not make me stronger. In fact, suppressing my true self, ignoring the fear and the rage that surround loss is exactly what in the long run will weaken me. When we talk of self-care, self-defense, and self-preservation, we need to talk about not overcoming our feelings of grief, but allowing them, making room for them. He closes his essay by saying that grief has power in working for justice and collective liberation. It is momentum. heart ends with the encouragement, it is not merely okay to grieve. It is wholly necessary if we are to maintain our if we are to remain connected to our collective power, truly invested in our liberation, and whole enough to sustain ourselves in the struggle. Perhaps another dimension of this is that we have been told that it's too early for anger. We have to mourn first. Perhaps that is why we haven't had a collective moment of mourning, because that would mean we could move on to the anger at the myriad systems that failed and allowed this pandemic to be a pandemic. Now, as we close up LGBTQ History Month, I think that the history around the AIDS epidemic and responses to it and from it can be instructive. From what I have read, there was both, and from what you likely know, there was both collective mourning, collective trauma, and direct action. Generations of gay men and other people with AIDS whose lives were lost. Stigmas around being positive, uncertainty, fear, dying alone, deserved rage at a government that was not responding. Organizations were founded like ACT UP. But what I have read is that there was also division. Why were there more people showing up at memorial services rather than joining activist organizations? Douglas Crimp asks this in his article titled Mourning and Militancy. We know, however, that both can happen. You can mourn and you can organize. Now, Sarah Schulman, in her essay, The Gentrification of AIDS, writes about this lack of a national permanent memorial for the victims of AIDS, comparing it to 9/11. She writes, 2,752 people in New York died on September 11th. These human beings are highly individuated. The recognition of their loss and suffering is national ritual, and the consequences of their aborted potential are assessed annually in public. Schulman reminds us of all the other memorials that are public and permanent to those who have died in 9/11. She contrasts that with how the 81,542 New Yorkers who died from AIDS were remembered. I believe that number goes from the first person who died up until whoever died, the number that died on September 11th, that total. She writes, they were despised and abandoned. They did not have rights or representation. They died because of the neglect of their government and their families. They have been ignored. The disallowed grief of 20 years of AIDS death was replaced by ritualized and institutionalized mourning of the acceptable dead. Schulman asks the important question, where is our permanent memorial? Not the AIDS quilt, now locked up in storage somewhere, but the government-sponsored invitation to mourn and understand. By not having this, we forget the potential that is lost when a life is ended too soon. We forget the families. Schulman finishes by speaking this fear. I fear that the descendants of people who died of AIDS do not fully understand that their parents perished because of governmental and societal neglect, not because they were gay or used drugs. Where is our catharsis? Where is our healing? Where is our post-traumatic stress diagnosis? Where is our recovery? Now, I don't think it is exactly fair to compare the AIDS epidemic with the coronavirus pandemic or the 9/11 attacks. Rebecca Mackay, in her interview with Jamal King, cautions us. She says, I think it would be really unfair to either situation to equate things. What I think we should remember how to do is compare and contrast, seeing similarities, seeing echoes, seeing divergences, figuring out why things are different and where they're different. She goes on to say, I think it is a really valid way to think epidemiologically, to think in terms of sociology. What are the ways in both cases that a pandemic, an epidemic, is magnifying the fissures, the inequalities that are already in society? That's a really important point of connection between these two. We can take lessons from the responses of these moments of collective trauma, but they are not the same. But there are similarities to be noted. I hope that both today and in the years to come, we find ways to memorialize those who died from the coronavirus. I say all of this because I am not a public health expert, but I am trained in ritual and grief work. I am aware of trauma and what it can do if you don't do anything with it, if you don't explore it. I wonder, will we have a yearly day of mourning from those who died from the coronavirus? Maybe it's the date of the first death in the United States. And First Parish in Framingham, I wonder if we might, with our key location in Framingham, decide to erect a public memorial to those residents of Framingham who died from the coronavirus. List their names, yes, but also make it a monument to the sacrifices we made by staying home. A monument to those who lost their job or quit their job. A monument to the businesses that closed. To those children, students, parents, and teachers who endured a year of virtual learning. Why would we do this? Well, Ed Young, in the most recent issue of The Atlantic, wrote this. He said, COVID-19 is an assault on the American body and a referendum on the ideas that animate its culture. Recovery is possible, but it demands radical introspection. We should strive to prevent illness instead of profiting from it. We should strive to build a healthcare system that prizes resilience over brittle efficiency. Jay Aronson and Scott Gabriel Knowles remind us that memorials are typically thought of as sites of contemplation and healing that are created after a catastrophic event. They are seen as endpoints and places of closure, and they are this, but they are also more. They serve as a forum for ongoing debate over the causes and long-term effects and meanings of a disaster. At their best, they also allow communities to engage in the long-term process of mending social ruptures, attending to survivors and families of victims, and coming to terms with the social failures. Memorials, like funerals and other death-related rituals, are more about the needs of the living than of the dead. So why am I talking about this on this Sunday? Because rituals and memorials help us with the work of collective healing. Aronson and Knowles point out that disaster researchers now view PTSD, lingering health effects, and victim long-term compensation as factors that we must attend to in order to collectively heal. Memorials, at their best, can be sites for ongoing research, the collection of oral histories, gathering visitor responses, the donation of artifacts, archiving legal proceedings, and the maintenance of health registries. I'm also speaking about this today because it is also poignant that this time of the year is the one where we are invited to pay attention to memory and to our ancestors. We see autumn's leaves falling, and we're reminded that the world is just transient. In the Christian liturgical year, this is a particularly rich time, with November 1st being All Saints' Day and November 2nd being All Souls' Day. All Saints' Day is the traditional observance. In its traditional observance was a day to venerate all Christians who had died and were in heaven. Our Unitarian Universalist denomination website defines All Souls' Day this way. The traditions of the Feast of All Souls began independently of the Feast of All Saints. The Feast of All Saints owes its beginning to 7th century monks who decided to offer on the day after Pentecost a Mass for their deceased community members. Now, in the late 10th century, the Benedictine monastery in Cluny chose to move their Mass for the dead to November 2nd, the day after the Feast of All Saints. Interestingly enough, the distinctly universalist observation of All Souls' Day was a celebration more of doctrine rather than of those who had died, at least according to a denominationally produced book of services in 1878, which said it is recommended that the first Sunday of November in each year be set apart as All Souls' Day for a special celebration of our distinguishing doctrine, the scriptural truth that all souls are God's children, and that finally by God's grace attending them, they will all be saved from the power of sin and will live and reign with God forever in holiness and happiness. In some ways, the liturgical practices of this church still nod to this practice when we say in the spoken affirmation that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. One of the other sources of our religious tradition is also earth-centered traditions. The Wiccan observance of Samhain is one of the cross-quarter days in the wheel of the year. It is right in between the autumnal equinox and also the winter solstice. It is the belief of many pagans that this is the time of the year when the veil between this world and the afterlife is at its thinnest point. My colleague, Catherine Clarenbach, expands Samhain by saying, Samhain expanded. It's all about an ethic of responsibility, expressed through calling out to ancestors and descendants, those who live in the shadows beyond the veil of life and death. Dear one, my friends watching this wherever you are watching this, we must find ways to memorialize the dead, because by memorializing, we bring healing. A life lost that is not properly mourned means that our balls of grief can push our pain buttons when we least expect them to. A generation lost that is not properly mourned and grieved is an unexamined loss, and future deaths are unable to be prevented. May we find ways to remember well, both in our collective grief and in our rebellious mourning. May it be so. I close with these words of benediction. Deep peace of the running wave to you. Deep peace of the flowing air to you. Deep peace of the quiet earth to you. Deep peace of the shining stars to you. Deep peace of the infinite peace to you. I now invite you to extinguish the flames you have lit in your homes, as I extinguish the flame of our chalice. As the flame goes out, let the smoke waft through the air for just a moment. And I invite you to type into the chat box, I carry the flame.